The blood didn't spread the way it does in movies in a clean, photogenic circle. It pooled in the grout lines of the hand-laid Portuguese tile, following the cracks the way water follows the lowest path. Slow and inevitable and unstoppable, she was lying face down in the middle of the sunroom. Her broad back, rising and falling in shallow, bubbling increments. And the white canvas of her uniform had turned the color of a dark red wine. Her name was Dorothea Marsh. She weighed 287 pounds, and she had just absorbed 3 rounds from a professional shooter to cover a 7-year-old boy who was not her child. Not her blood. And not her responsibility by any measure the world would have recognized. The man who would make her his wife was still 2 floors away. Mid-sentence in a phone call that was about to stop, mattering entirely. Nobody at the Hargrove compound called her Dorothea. Nobody called her anything. Really. Among the kitchen staff, she was occasionally referred to as the big one when shift assignments were being handed out, as in give the service elevator cleaning to the big one. She can manage the equipment. The estate's head of household, a thin, pinched woman named Mrs. Ostroff, had once described her in writing. Dorothea had seen the staffing memo as physically substantial, too appropriate for utility assignments. The Hargrove estate sat on 42 acres outside of Providence, Rhode Island, behind gates that didn't appear on any map application, and a perimeter that was patrolled by men with earpieces and extremely short fuses. It was the primary residence of Marcus Hargrove, patriarch of what federal prosecutors called an expansive and well-insulated criminal organization, operating across 7 northeastern states, and what Marcus Hargrove himself called, simply, the family business. Dorothea had come to work there through a staffing agency that asked no unusual questions, offered unusual pay, and required the signing of an unusually detailed confidentiality agreement. The hourly rate was 4 times what she had made cleaning rooms at a convention hotel in Warwick, and her younger brother's ongoing treatment for a degenerative joint condition in both knees wasn't something she could fund on hospitality wages. So, she signed the agreement, passed the background check, and reported for duty on a cold Monday in February with 2 pairs of industrial knee pads and the quiet, practiced stoicism of a woman who had spent her entire adult life learning to need very little from other people. Her body had been a subject of public commentary since she was 11 years old. By 34, she had developed a kind of dense, weatherproof indifference to it. She heard what the younger maid said near the linen closets. She noticed the way certain capos, men with gold watches and the moral architecture of a parking garage, would clock her in the hallway and then look through her as if the visual data hadn't warranted filing. She felt the deliberate smallness of the sizing conversations Mrs. Ostroff initiated when ordering new staff uniforms. The way the woman's eyes moved across Dorothea's frame, with a measuring quality that had nothing clinical about it. None of it broke her. She had bills. She had her brother. She had the work. And the work got done. Then she met Caleb. Caleb Hargrove was 7 years old. And he was the saddest child Dorothea had ever encountered in her life. He had his father's jaw and his dead mother's eyes, deep set, dark, amber, and carrying a weight that no first grader should have to carry. His mother, Elena Hargrove, had been killed in a car that had been rigged to explode 18 months before Dorothea arrived. A targeted assassination that the police had officially ruled inconclusive, and that Marcus Hargrove had responded to by dissolving 3 rival operations and executing the men responsible in a manner that remained in certain circles. The subject of hushed and impressed, recounting the result of Eleanor's death, from Caleb's perspective, was that his father had become something closer to a weather system than a parent vast, powerful, capable of sudden and total destruction, but not really there in the way the boy needed. The nannies and tutors rotated on Marcus's schedule, not Caleb's. The bodyguards were professional and capable and completely unequipped to address the emotional requirements of a grieving child. Caleb wandered the 42 acres like he was looking for something he couldn't name. Dorothea found him sitting on the cold tiles of the service corridor near the kitchen storage, pressing his back against the wall, with his knees tucked up, in the particular posture of a child who has run out of better hiding places. She had just finished hauling 3 industrial mop buckets back to the utility room, and her ankles were aching badly enough to make her eyes water. She sat down across from him on the floor, which took effort, and which she did anyway, and opened the paper bag she'd brought from the commissary. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just split a blueberry muffin in half and held out the larger piece. He looked at it, then at her. Then he took it. They sat in silence for 6 minutes, which was, Dorothea would later reflect, the most companionable 6 minutes she'd experienced in years. After that, it became a pattern, not every day, and never in the main rooms where Mrs. Ostroff or the rotating roster of Hargrove's lieutenants might notice, but in the back corridors, in the unused east sitting room where the furniture was covered in dust sheets, in the solarium where she was often assigned to work mornings, Caleb would materialize like a small, serious ghost and position himself near enough to her that he could observe her working. And sometimes he would talk and sometimes he wouldn't. And Dorothea followed his lead. He told her about a video game he wasn't allowed to have. He told her, haltingly, about a dream he'd had about his mother standing in the garden in her yellow coat. He told her that one of the night shift guards had a dog named Colonel, who was very fat and very soft, and that he thought about Colonel sometimes when he couldn't sleep. Dorothea listened to all of it. She brought him shortbread from the kitchen. She let him lean against her side while she polished the window fixtures in the east corridor. And when he fell asleep sitting up against her, she sat very still and didn't move until he woke on his own. "You're warm," he told her once, with the clinical directness of a 7-year-old. The other lady, Mrs. Portman, she's all sharp. You're not sharp anywhere. Dorothea thought about that for a long time afterward. She thought about it more than she expected to. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in March, when the sky over Providence had turned the pale, flat grey of old pewter, and the wind was pushing rain sideways against the solarium's tall windows. Dorothea was on a step stool, cleaning the upper brackets of the window track with a microfiber cloth and a spray bottle of glass treatment solution. Caleb was at the low table near the interior wall, working with significant focus on a drawing. He had a phase of elaborate architectural drawings that he took very seriously and refused to explain. His assigned protection for the afternoon was a guard named Terence, a capable and generally conscientious man who stepped into the adjacent hallway to take what he clearly expected to be a brief call. Protocol required a 30-second handoff to a second guard before any such movement. He skipped it. Nobody would ever be able to fully explain why. The first thing Dorothea heard was a sound, like someone hitting a heavy door with a battering ram, one impact. Deep and final from somewhere in the east wing. Then silence, for perhaps 3 seconds. Then the specific, unmistakable sound of suppressed automatic fire coming from the direction of the main corridor. She was off the step stool before she had made any conscious decision. Her body moved on something older and faster than thought, landing her on the tile with a jarring impact that sent a shock of pain up through her bad left ankle. And she was already crossing the room toward Caleb when the Solarium door, reinforced glass, rated for standard ballistics, was kicked open from the outside. 2 men in matte black tactical gear came through the door. A third followed through the hallway entrance, cutting off the room's secondary exit. They were efficient and they were organized, and one of them was already raising a compact submachine gun while the other 2 covered the perimeter. The laser sight swept from the left side of the room to the right and settled on Caleb, who had gone completely rigid in his chair, his drawing still in his hands, staring at the red dot on his chest with an expression of absolute, unprocessed terror. He did not move. He was 7 years old, and he was too frightened to move. Dorothea was between them before the gunman completed his trigger pull. She hit Caleb with the full, committed weight of her body, driving him off the chair and down to the floor. And she covered him completely, entirely. Her arms around him and her body, a curved wall over his in the half-second before the first shot fired. The bullet entered her upper left shoulder at close range, and the force of it was like being struck by a moving vehicle. The pain was not like anything she had felt before. It detonated outward from the entry point and lit up every nerve in her left arm and chest and neck, and she screamed, not a small sound. A genuine, full-throated scream of biological shock, but she did not move. She pressed her face into the floor beside Caleb's ear and said, very clearly, "I have you. Don't move. I have you." The second shot caught her in the back, lower and to the right. Her body absorbed it, physically, structurally. Her density, the depth of muscle and fat across her back and torso, slowed the round enough that it did not exit. She felt it as a pressure, and then a burning, and then a searing, spreading wrongness that made her vision swim. She held on. The third shot broke a rib. She heard it crack before she felt it. A sharp interior sound, like a green branch being snapped. And then the pain arrived enormous. Architectural. A restructuring of everything inside her chest, and she breathed through it in small, careful increments, because breathing was the thing that kept her over the boy. The shooter stepped forward. He didn't finish. The Solarium doors came off their upper hinge in an explosion of force and sound. Marcus Hargrove came through the gap with a weapon already raised and men behind him. And what happened in the following 11 seconds was the most concentrated violence Dorothea had ever been proximate to. And she was conscious for all of it. Face pressed to the cold tile, Caleb's small hands gripping the front of her uniform. The boy crying softly against the side of her neck. When it was over, and the room was quiet, except for the rain, and a faint persistent ringing in her ears, she heard footsteps cross the floor toward her. Fast. Then stopping. Kneeling. Caleb. Marcus Hargrove's voice had a texture in it she had never heard from him before. Not authority. Not danger. Pure. Unfiltered terror. Caleb. Dorothea managed to shift her weight to the side. It cost her something significant. She could feel it in the way her breath went ragged, but she moved. And Caleb came free, and the boy threw himself into his father's arms with a cry that broke something open in the room. Marcus held him. For a long time, he just held him. Then he looked down at Dorothea. She was lying on her side on the Solarium tile, and the tile around her was dark, and her uniform was ruined, and her eyes were trying to stay focused and mostly failing. "Is he Her voice had a wet quality she didn't care for. "Is he hurt?" Marcus looked at her with an expression she didn't have the consciousness left to fully read. "He's not hurt," Marcus said. He reached out and took her hand. His was large and calloused, and she registered the warmth of it from a great distance. "Dorothea, stay awake." "I'm trying," she said honestly. He turned his head and said something to the men behind him, sharp. "Absolute." The voice of someone who expected the laws of the universe to comply, and she didn't quite catch it because the ringing had gotten louder and the edges of her vision had taken on a heavy, collapsing quality. The last thing she was clearly aware of was the weight of something being placed on her left hand. Metal, warm, from his skin, set deliberately, with both his hands, onto her ring finger. She didn't know what it was yet. She was already going. She woke in stages, the way someone surfaces from very deep water. The first stage was sound a monitor, regular and measured. The second was smell, antiseptic and clean linen. The third was light, and the effort of opening her eyes against it. She was in a room she didn't immediately recognize. High ceiling, crown molding, the particular quality of expensive quiet that meant thick walls and good insulation. An ICU that had been assembled inside the Hargrove estate by what she would later learn was a 4-person private medical team flown in from Boston. 11 days had passed. Marcus was in the chair beside her bed. He was not wearing the suit she had always seen him in. He was wearing a dark shirt with the sleeves pushed up, and he looked like a man who had not fully slept in almost 2 weeks. And when she made a sound, barely anything, just a shift in her breathing, his eyes came to her immediately. "Leo," she said. She meant Caleb. The pain medication had scrambled something briefly. "Caleb," Marcus corrected. Gently. "He's fine. He's drawn you 43 pictures. I had to impose a 44-picture limit for everyone's sanity." She tried to laugh, and her reconstructed rib objected strenuously. She breathed through it. "You need to not do that yet," Marcus said. "I'll take it under advisement." She looked at her left hand, which felt heavier than it should. The ring was extraordinary. It was a heavy gold band, set with a dense arrangement of small diamonds. And at its center, the Hargrove family insignia was worked in relief. And it was extremely, almost comically large on her finger. And it was absolutely, unmistakably real. "I don't understand what this is," she said. "It means you are under my name," Marcus said, in the tone of someone who had already made peace with the decision and was not revisiting it. "It means no one touches you. It means you are protected by everything I have and everything I am. I'm a housekeeper. You were a housekeeper," Marcus said. "You put yourself in front of 3 rounds for my son. The women I brought into this house, the ones who looked right, they locked themselves in the panic room and left a 7-year-old alone. You stayed." He leaned forward. His voice dropped. "I spent 2 years looking for something worth protecting in this operation. I had it the whole time, and I didn't see it. I'm not making that error again." Dorothea looked at him for a long time. "Your people will think this is humiliating," she said. "For you. A man like you marrying someone who looks like me." Marcus Hargrove's expression changed into something she had no prior experience, with a combination of fury and certainty. So absolute, it altered the atmosphere of the room. "The first person," he said quietly, "who suggests that within my hearing will require reconstructive surgery. I'm not looking for a decoration. I'm looking for a foundation, and I have found one. The wedding was in late January. In the snow-covered formal garden behind the main house, there were no outside guests. The attendees were capos, lieutenants, and 3 allied family heads who had been summoned rather than invited. The ceremony was brief and heavily armed, and conducted under a white tent with heat lamps and good champagne. Dorothea walked down the aisle on her own, without a cane, because she had spent 8 weeks in physical therapy refusing to let her rebuilt ribs and punctured lung have the final word on what she was capable of. She wore a custom gown in heavy ivory crepe, with a cathedral-length train, and the woman who had made it a seamstress from Newport who worked exclusively by private commission and asked very few questions, had understood immediately that the goal was not to minimize, but to command. The dress made Dorothea look like the physical embodiment of an institution. When she reached the altar, Marcus took her hand. Around them, 50 of the most dangerous men in the northeastern United States watched in absolute silence. "You are the center of this family now," Marcus said, low enough that only she could hear. "Not by default, by right. You earned it." When he kissed her, it was not a ceremonial gesture. It was a statement. His hand at her waist pulled her toward him with a deliberateness that communicated to every calculating eye in that garden that this was not obligation or politics or a calculated alliance. This was a man claiming his. The traitor surfaced on a Tuesday night in February. 6 weeks after the wedding, an urgent message reached Marcus while he was at dinner. A cargo situation at the New Bedford waterfront required his immediate personal attention. The message had the correct verification codes and came through a trusted channel. He kissed Dorothea. I told her he'd be back by 3 in the morning, and left with 8 men. Dorothea was reading to Caleb in the master suite when the knock came. It was Derek Foss, Marcus's second, a man who had been with the operation for 19 years and who wore his loyalty to Marcus Hargrove like a decoration he'd earned and intended to keep polishing. He had a lined, intelligent face and cold grey eyes, and he had always been extremely correct and professional in his dealings with Dorothea. He locked the door behind him. She noticed. "Marcus is in New Bedford," he said, walking toward the bed with his right hand moving inside his jacket. "I know where Marcus is," Dorothea said. She closed the book. She kept her voice level for Caleb, who was already pressing close against her side, reading the room with the instincts of a child who had grown up in a house where the quality of silence had meaning. "I sent him there." Derek produced the gun, a suppressed 9mm, compact and professional. His face had an expression that was not cruelty exactly, but something worse. The face of a man who had already processed the moral arithmetic and found it acceptable. He's chasing nothing. It'll take him 40 minutes to realize it, and 40 minutes to get back. That's more than enough. You were the one who gave the Romano people the guard schedules, Dorothea said. Marcus has been making bad decisions for 2 years. Derek said. Since Elena died, he's been running on grief and anger, and it's been bad for business. And this, his eyes moved across her with something that had enough contempt in it to be painful. If she'd let it be, this is the worst decision he's made. You? He put you in the chair. A woman they're laughing at in every family from here to Philadelphia. He shook his head. I'm protecting the organization by murdering a woman in front of a 7-year-old, Dorothea said, by removing an embarrassment before it becomes a liability. Dorothea looked at him. What Derek Foss had failed to account for, what several people had failed to account for lately. making Dorothea wonder if there was something wrong with the general standard of threat assessment in organized crime, was that Marcus Hargrove had spent 3 evenings in the week following their wedding teaching his wife, with considerable patience and evident conviction, exactly how to fire the weapon he had placed in the drawer of the bedside table. He had made her practice the draw, the grip, the stance, adjusted for her dimensions in a way that gave her the most stable possible platform. "You are not a small target," he had told her, with the pragmatic love of a man who dealt in operational realities. "That means they will always feel confident going at you directly. I need you to be able to go back at them first." She had practiced until her hand didn't shake. It didn't shake now. "You're right about one thing," Dorothea said, her right hand sliding under the heavy comforter toward the nightstand drawer in a movement she had rehearsed until it was completely, utterly casual. "I'm not fast." The shot she fired caught Derek Foss in his left knee. She had aimed for the center of mass, but she had also determined in the approximately 4 seconds she'd had to make the decision that she did not want to explain to Caleb, who was pressed against her left side and would be present for whatever happened next. Why, there was a dead man on the bedroom floor. The knee accomplished the immediate goal. Derek went down, screaming, the gun skittering across the hardwood floor. And Dorothea came off the bed and crossed the room and kicked the weapon under the dresser with a decisiveness that surprised even her. She was standing over Derek Foss with the weapon leveled at him, one arm around Caleb, who had come after her and was pressed against her leg. When Marcus came through the door 17 minutes later, he had driven back at speeds that would have been illegal in any context and that were, in the operational context of the Hargrove organization, simply Tuesday. He stopped. He took in the scene. Derek Foss was bleeding on the floor. Dorothea was holding a gun with perfect steadiness and a 7-year-old boy at her side. The room was otherwise entirely orderly. Marcus Hargrove lowered his weapon. For a moment he simply looked at his wife. Then he crossed the room, and he took the gun very gently from her hand and set it down. And he pulled her into him, all of her, his arms going around her fully, his face in her hair, and she felt the quality of his breathing, the way it was still recovering from something, still coming down from the particular terror of a man who drove back through a February storm believing he might be too late. "I have you," he said. It was her phrase, the one she'd used for Caleb in the Solarium. He'd heard it from Caleb, who had quoted it back to him, word for word. In the days after, she put her arms around him and held on. "You have us," she corrected. Behind her, Caleb pressed himself into the embrace from the side, one small arm around each of them, completing the shape. The federal investigation that followed Derek Foss's arrest would eventually unravel 2 years of compromised security and prosecute 11 members of the organization's outer ring. Marcus navigated it with the patience and controlled brutality of a man who had built an empire on the understanding that accountability, applied correctly, was its own form of power. Dorothea navigated it differently. She learned the household, then the organization's perimeter, then the inner logic of how the family operated and where its pressure points were. She asked questions that revealed, to the men around her, a quality of structural thinking that none of them had expected. She had been watching the operation for 18 months as a housekeeper, observing from the margins. Invisible and therefore fully unfiltered, she had seen things no one who mattered had thought to hide from her. She used that knowledge carefully and completely by the following autumn. 3 of the capos who had laughed at Marcus's choice of wife had either retired quietly or discovered that retirement was considerably preferable to the alternative. The allied families who had sent mocking messages through intermediaries received, in return, the particular experience of watching Dorothea Hargrove operate in a room, the precision of her, the absolute composure, the way she said things once, clearly, and did not repeat herself. The mockery stopped. Caleb turned 8 in October. In a kitchen full of flour and the smell of a chocolate cake that Dorothea had made herself, his face serious with the effort of blowing out all 8 candles in one breath. "I did it," he said, looking up at her. "You did." She agreed. He thought about it. "What did you wish for?" "I didn't wish for anything," she said. "I already have what I want." He considered this with the philosophical gravity he brought to everything. "That seems like a waste of a wish." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe it means I got here without needing one." She looked across the kitchen to where Marcus was standing in the doorway, watching them both, with an expression on his face that she had learned, over the course of a year, to read correctly. It was the face of a man who had spent a long time governing a world built entirely on what things cost, and who had discovered, quite late, that the most important things in it were free. She held his gaze. Outside, the first snow of the season had started to fall across 42 acres of Providence, Rhode Island, settling quietly on the gates and the gardens and the graves of things that had not survived the year. Inside, it was warm,